You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristodoulou.
Welcome back, everybody, to more of the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristodoulou, and today I am diving into the Cincinnati Bengals and some things that I would like to see from them in this free agency year. So, my Bengals fans, make sure you sit back, kick your feet up, and comment down below. Let me know, what do you want to see from your Bengals team going into this free agency market? I would say this is not like the most glamorous free agency market we've seen, especially considering the last few years and some of the names that popped up. But that kind of suits well for the Bengals, who, with $36.2 million in their pockets to play with, are probably not necessarily going to be the biggest spenders despite that. I would say that I look at this as more of you're going to have a couple of decisions to make. There's obviously the pending Jesse Bates situation and what ends up happening with him. But there's some other potential free agents, I should say, as well. Some people that I think are either worth re-signing, maybe letting go. And then obviously, as far as what are you going to target in free agency, I don't think, again, you're going to be big spenders. You're going to be looking for quality depth to add to your team. And I have a guy in mind, so we'll talk about that towards the end as well. But let me know in the comment section down below. Players you want to see them let go, or you think they should let go, people they need to bring back, or maybe somebody that you want to see them pick up in this free agent class. We'll start with who I think they need to let go, and this was one I kind of bounced around on a few times here, but I think ultimately, just because of age and the potential for what his contract could end up being, this one kind of makes sense in moving on from cornerback Eli Apple. This is a passing league, contracts inflate, and while Eli Apple has, I would say, had a controversial last couple of years, I like Eli Apple. I like his game. Has he had a few miscues here and there in some big spots? Yeah, sure. That Super Bowl last year comes to mind. But ultimately, for me, this is more so about just how much money he could potentially command. Spotrac has him listed for a potential 2-year, $11.6 million per type of deal. I don't know if the number is going to actually be that high. Their estimates are obviously based off of what other people around his age with his skill level and numbers kind of signed at. So that's obviously up for debate. But the way I see it, he could sign for 2, maybe even 3 years, especially because of his age. And just again, he's been solid, but has had a few miscues here and there. But overall, a pretty solid cornerback and has done a pretty good job opposite of Awuzie. But ultimately, again, between pricing and just how you need to plan for the future in re-signing for Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase, and there's rumors of T. Higgins being traded, but what if T. Higgins doesn't get traded and they opt to try to bring him back and maybe move on from Tyler Boyd in the next year or so? There's a lot up in the air right now and a lot of money that's going to have to be thrown around in the next couple of years. So again, you're trying to save money where you can, and you have guys like Taylor Britt, who's very young, drafted him last year, looked solid in the limited play time that he had, especially once Awuzie went down. It ended up being a position where he had to play a lot more than I think he maybe anticipated, but you can always look to the draft to get quality defensive back depth. So I think if you just think on the terms of, okay, we have Taylor Britt, obviously Awuzie is coming back. He didn't play a ton last year because of injury. If you go and draft a defensive back and say day 2 of the draft, you can kind of mitigate the loss of Eli Apple. This just seems like one that is more so because of cost than performance and just the potential of how much money Eli Apple could potentially make, again, in a passing league where numbers are being inflated every single year. We saw it with the wide receiver market, and good cornerback play to even upper but not quite top level cornerback play is in high demand, and teams with money are willing to pay for that. And I just think that for the Bengals and their current money situation and just how the next few years look for them, this is one you could probably move on from and it be okay. Now, looking into the re-signing side of things, somebody that I think that they should bring back here, and while it might not be the flashiest of re-signings, this is one that I think in the 13 games that he managed to play this past season, he showed some chemistry with Joe Burrow. I definitely think that the Bengals should highly consider bringing back Hayden Hurst. This is somebody that I think you can get for somewhere along the lines of him being about to be 30 years old, because he turns 30 in August. So I shouldn't say 30 just yet. 29 at the moment. He'll be 30 though for this next season. You could get him for something like a 2-year deal. You're not committing a ton of money. Spotrac has him listed for 6.8. I think you could get closer to 6 on top of that, especially with the appeal of playing with Joe Burrow and his numbers looking really good in the 13 games he played. 52 catches, 414 yards, a couple of touchdowns. Can only imagine what those numbers would look like if he had played the entire 17-game slate. You're probably looking at, 60-plus receptions, maybe like 500-plus yards. Maybe you throw in an extra touchdown or two in there, and you have some really good numbers for a full season. And again, Hurst is not necessarily the wow factor at tight end that some of the guys are in the NFL right now, but for me, I feel like there were some spots, especially late in the season, where you could feel the trust that was coming from Joe Burrow in some pretty gutsy situations, and I feel like he kept finding Hayden Hurst in some plays. This is one where it's more of out of necessity and allowing you to continue to try to figure out what you're going to do in the future with your tight end position. Again, I don't think Hayden Hurst is the long-term answer. He's already about to be 30 years old, but he is a good bridge guy for you to bring in somebody else, maybe learn the ropes from him. He's a vet, and again, he showed really good chemistry and a good understanding of what was going on over there in Cincinnati, and I think it really showed this past season in the time that he did get to play. So sign him to a short-term deal, and then you kind of, whether you're looking in the draft or maybe you wait till next year, see a younger tight end or two here or there get cut between now and free agency of next year. Maybe there's somebody else you scoop up that you really like that's younger, more athletic, that fits more of the more premier type of tight end threat mold we're kind of starting to see things turn into here in the NFL. It just feels like a no-brainer type of signing. Not a lot of money. He's a veteran guy, and again, he showed good chemistry within the offense, and it seemed like he really knew what was going on there. So it's kind of a no-brainer for me. Not a lot of money, smart guy that Joe Burrow trusts. Why not bring him back? Even if it's not for 2 years, hell, sign him for a 1-year deal. Give him $6-7 million for just that 1 year, and then you're not really committed to him beyond that. And if he plays really well and maybe he gets through a full 17 games, you bring him back for another year. You could go that route as well. Obviously, is Hayden Hurst up for that? That would be up for debate as well. It would depend on him and what his agent thinks. But I just feel like him sticking around in Cincinnati, it feels like a good re-signing to me. Now, as far as picking somebody up goes, to wrap up this video here, I am looking at more so adding depth and experience to the offensive line. Now, obviously, last offseason, a lot of money got dumped to the offensive line. You got your pretty much starting 5 group put together for the most part. But I will say that it was clear, especially towards the end of the season, that the lack of depth really hurt this team. And I would argue that with the, 3 starting linemen that you were missing basically going into the playoffs and for a handful of your playoff run, it really hurt you to not have a really strong group of guys to back up the starting 5 that you had for your offensive line. So with that, and again, to go back to what I said earlier, I don't necessarily think this is going to be a big spending year for the Bengals by any means. I think that I would really like to see them re-sign Jesse Bates. I don't necessarily know if that's going to happen or not. I would love to see it because I think you could maybe manage it. You're probably going to have to pay him a little bit more than you want to, but at the end of the day, I mean, he's a really good player in the backfield, so you really want to go after a guy like that for your defense, but whatever. With that, if you're not signing him, you still have a ton of money, and I think if you're not signing him, you're planning for, again, Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Logan Wilson's another guy that I think you really need to focus on keeping there. And those guys are going to eat up a chunk of money. And again, I kind of threw out the little hypothesis there of maybe seeing, or theory, I guess you should say, I don't know, whatever you want to call it, theory of maybe you keep T. Higgins despite all the trade rumors and you move on from Tyler Boyd. Then you have to try to figure out how to pay T. Higgins as well if that's the direction you opt to go. I think your focus here in free agency, because you should really be looking on just diving into depth and filling out your roster in the draft. You need to get a guy, I think he's been solid through his career, offensive guard Trey Turner. This is someone who's had some ups and downs here and there. I feel like depending on what fan you talk to of what team, you may hear some good things or some bad things about him, but not somebody who by any means was awful, and he's not necessarily, I would say, a starting caliber guy, but when you look at what your offensive line was doing in that AFC Championship game against the Chiefs, you're letting up 5 sacks as things were starting to fall apart. A guy like him who played about 700 snaps last season, I think he was credited for, 2 sacks alone. not a bad guy to maybe think about bringing in to help just increase the depth on the O-line. You couple that with the fact that he's estimated to be signing a deal somewhere along the lines of like maybe $2.5 million a year, something along there. He's 29 years old. I don't think that's really much of a bad idea at all. There's a clear need for some depth, especially in the pass protection side of things. I know that the backup offensive line looked really good against the Bills in terms of the running game, but you need to be able to protect Joe Burrow, He is, again, the engine of the offense. He keeps things moving there, and you're going to be dropping back more than you are running the football with Joe Burrow under center. So I think you're not spending a lot this free agency. Focus on getting some quality, experienced depth guys that you can trust to come in when necessary, or as a spell guy if you have an offensive lineman who just needs to take off for a few snaps here and there. Someone like Trey Turner who could fill in at the offensive guard spot, I think would be a no-brainer. Again, not the sexiest pick by any means. I don't expect this to wow anybody with me talking about it, but it is someone that I think would fit in really well with what they need over there in Cincinnati. But that's how I look at the free agency period for the Cincinnati Bengals. Let me know, my Bengals fans, what you think in the comment section down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions. But that's it for me for now. I will see you all in another video. Have a good one, my Bengals fans.